Welcome to Reduce Your Risk, Integrating Adaptation into Local Planning. This is part of the online series Providing Resilience Education for Planning in Rhode Island, or PREP-RI. I am Pam Rubinoff with URI's Coastal Resources Center in Rhode Island Sea Grant. I'm joined today by Chelsea Seifert, Planning Director for the town of South Kingstown. By the end of this module, you will be able to describe the process of incorporating adaptation into local planning and identify adaptation strategies to address flooding and other climate change related impacts in coastal communities. So why should we adapt to or plan for the impacts of a changing climate, impacts that are expected to worsen in the future? As you've learned in other PREP-RI modules, the impacts of climate change, such as increased flooding and erosion, are already being felt in Rhode Island. By taking proactive steps now to adapt, we can help protect people and places from the impacts today, as well as reduce the burden on our children and generations in the future. Cities and towns are on the front line of reducing the vulnerability of people, infrastructure, and the environment to the impacts of climate change. So what can we do? The process of incorporating adaptation into local planning may be boiled down to three main steps. The first step is to know your risk by defining your scope, including which hazards will be examined and over which timeframes, and assessing impacts using the best available data. The second step is to make a plan by designing and adopting adaptation goals, policies, and actions, and incorporating them into local documents and procedures. The third step is to take action and evaluate the effectiveness of adaptation measures by monitoring them over time. It's important to reevaluate your risk as new information becomes available and to apply what you've learned in previous efforts to modify future actions. It's also important to incorporate stakeholder engagement throughout to ensure that the concerns of the community are addressed. Outreach to residents and business owners, engaging with all municipal departments, and coordinating with state agencies will facilitate buy-in for action. There are myriad tools to help you understand risk at both the community and site scales. Storm Tools maps show the extent and depth of flooding from different storm surge and sea level rise scenarios. The Rhode Island Floodplain Mapper shows flood hazard areas as delineated on FEMA's flood insurance rate maps. The Shoreline Change Maps display erosion trends used to determine regulatory coastal setbacks. Sea Level Affecting Marshes Model, or SLAM maps, display how wetlands are projected to migrate inland under various sea level rise scenarios. The Social Vulnerability and Sea Level Rise and Transportation fact sheets highlight related issues for each coastal community that are useful for planning. Flood evacuation maps show zones that are recommended to be evacuated during potential worst-case hurricane surge inundation. Watch the mapping module for more information on the various tools available. Such information may be compiled into assessments of exposure to coastal hazards that help local officials make informed decisions, leading to safer, more resilient communities. For example, the town of North Kingstown worked with URI to examine the impacts of climate change on the community, resulting in a series of maps that identify the natural and physical assets most vulnerable to sea level rise and increasing storminess. Now I'll hand it over to Chelsea.
After Know Your Risk comes Make a Plan. Rhode Island cities and towns are now required to include natural hazards and climate change impacts in their community's comprehensive plan. The Comp Plan conveys broad goals and policies for adaptation, and the Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is required if seeking mitigation funding, addresses those goals with specific actions. Other community plans follow suit. Capital and transportation improvement plans include things like building retrofits, road raising or rerouting, and stormwater system redesign. Subdivision and land development regulations and zoning ordinances may be amended to ensure that natural hazards and climate change impacts are appropriately considered early on in the review process. There are great resources available to assist you in these efforts that are listed in the resources document accompanying this video. Several Rhode Island communities have already incorporated natural hazards and climate change impacts into their planning. For example, North Kingstown developed a vision statement stressing the importance of resilience. In Newport, protecting historic resources in the face of climate change and sea level rise is included in the Historical and Cultural Resources section of their comprehensive plan, in addition to other key priorities addressed in their Natural Hazards and Climate Change chapter. Barrington's plan included a section on planning for impacts of sea level rise on coastal wetlands, informed by the SLAM project. Adaptation may also be incorporated into community zoning ordinances and subdivision and land development regulations. For instance, South Kingstown created a coastal community overlay district that allows, among other things, the elevation of buildings up to 5 feet above base flood elevation without triggering a height variance. This additional height above the FEMA regulated base flood elevation, called freeboard, goes beyond the Rhode Island State Building Code minimum of 1 foot. South Kingstown is also revising their subdivision and land development regulations to provide guidance to the planning board when making decisions regarding development in high flood hazard areas. The next step is to use your plans to take action. There are 3 main categories of adaptation strategies: avoid, accommodate, and protect. The approach taken in your community will likely be a combination of all 3. Avoid ensures that development doesn't occur in areas at moderate to high risk to coastal hazards, or where the risk is low at present but will likely increase over time. For instance, communities may enact overlay districts, as mentioned earlier, to limit or condition development, or institute special design considerations in vulnerable areas. In cases where development already exists in risky areas, retrofitting may be in order, or managed retreat considered. The strategic decision to relocate or abandon private or public assets at risk to flood hazards was implemented by the City of Cranston after the 2010 floods. Private homes at risk of flooding from the Patuxent River were demolished and the floodplain returned to open space. The final report claimed that the project is not only the best alternative, it is also the most feasible and cost-effective alternative. Accommodate involves solutions that essentially allow for impacts to occur, but minimizes them as much as possible. Accommodation strategies include elevating structures on pilings in flood-prone areas and designing buildings to allow floodwaters to enter the lowest floor while relocating critical systems such as heating and electrical to upper floors to avoid damage. Temporary or mobile structures may also be encouraged. For example, after the devastating effects of Superstorm Sandy, Sam's Snack Bar and Little Mermaids in Westerly reopened as mobile restaurants. The Andrea Hotel was rebuilt as just a restaurant that can be moved if needed. Accommodate can address both private development, as in the Westerly example, as well as public facilities and infrastructure. In South Kingstown, hazard mitigation assistance funds were used to relocate and elevate the town beach pavilion to accommodate future flooding and erosion impacts. Parts of vulnerable roads may be removed and replaced by natural filtration strips to control stormwater and protect against coastal flooding and erosion. Protect is used to prevent impacts to the greatest extent possible through the use of natural and built systems. Protecting and restoring natural buffers like salt marshes and dune systems help slow down chronic erosion and reduce wave impacts during storms. Marshes also provide wildlife habitat, carbon storage capability, and infiltration. They may not, however, fully protect a large and expensive piece of critical infrastructure from a 16-foot storm surge, for instance. While structural protection measures like hurricane barriers, seawalls, and riprap may be used in such cases, it's important to remember that these strategies are only effective and permitted in certain locations. They also may tend to amplify the force of the water that hits them, exacerbating erosion and putting them at risk of collapse. The initial construction costs, along with required maintenance, make them expensive investments. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Pam to finish up.
As you've seen, many communities are already preparing for the impacts of climate change. By using the tools available to understand their vulnerabilities, local communities can incorporate adaptation strategies in their plans and procedures to reduce flooding, erosion, and other climate-related impacts, which will ultimately protect the well-being of our residents and communities as a whole. It is important to note that the efforts presented, and many others, are successful in large part because of strong partnerships. For example, municipalities may partner with their local land trust to protect open space, or with the local historic commission on design guidelines. Thank you for viewing this module. Go to the PrepRI website to see the resources document and presentation notes, to fill out the survey, get your certificate, and view the other modules. The PrepRI team acknowledges the support of statewide leaders, experts, and practitioners who help make this module a reality. And thanks to the PrepRI team for pulling this module together.